This program is made possible in part by the National Endowment for the Arts, with additional funding from the Maryland Humanities Council. Michael Collier talks with Moshe Dor and Barbara Goldberg.
Welcome to The Writing Life. My name is Michael Collier, and today I'm here speaking with Moshe Dor and Barbara Goldberg, who are the editors and translators of a book of an anthology of Israeli poems on war and peace titled After the First Rain. And we're going to listen to them read the poems today and also talk about the genesis of the project and some of the different aspects. I also hope to hear, especially from Moshe, about the vibrancy of Israeli poetry. Before we begin reading, I just want to introduce them a little bit. Moshe Dor is one of Israel's leading literary figures. He's published over 30 books of poetry and has won Israel's top literary prizes, the Bialik Award and the Prime Minister's Prize among them. He's also worked as a journalist for many years and also worked in the Israeli embassy in London as the cultural counsel. Barbara Goldberg is a Maryland resident and a poet. She has published a couple books of poems, I think 4 or 5, and is a recipient of such awards as the National Endowment for the Arts Fellowship. She's also the Howard County Poetry and Literary Society's writer in residence, and she's just back from a morning and early afternoon visits to local high schools. Can I have you read a poem from the anthology to begin?
It's very difficult to read Israeli poetry without bringing in biblical references because the land of Israel is so steeped with biblical landscapes. And for this first poem, which is by Azriel Kaufman, the reference is to Cain. My brother is Cain. And even though there's that biblical reference, this is very much of a contemporary poem and was written on the occasion of Yitzhak Rabin's assassination. And how my brother is Cain. Those who walked to weep, those who walked to write, and I walked and walked and walked, and under my feet words hummed, and I walked over the dark and over despair and over silence, and a demon walked through my heart, and the gun, and there was a bullet, and there was a shot, and years collapse, and how my brother with blood on his hands, and how my brother is Cain, and I walked and walked, and there came a fire consuming the silence. I think the horror in Israel in terms of the assassination is that the assassin was a fellow Israeli. It was not a stranger, but a brother like Cain.
Shall I read the Hebrew
Please
original?
do.
ואיך אחי הוא קין, מי שהלך לבכות, מי שהלך לכתוב, ואני הלכתי והלכתי והלכתי, ומתחת לרגלי המו מילים, ואני הלכתי והלכתי, ועל השחור הלכתי, ועל הייאוש, ועל הדם הלכתי, ועל השתיקה, ובליבי עבר שטן, והאקדח, וכדור היה, וירייה הייתה, ושנים הולכות מתמוטטות, ואיך אחי עם דם על הידיים, ואיך אחי הוא קין, ואני הלכתי והלכתי, ואש הייתה, ואכלה את השתיקה.
When you first began the project, it was before Rabin was assassinated. Is that right?
Yeah,
So
it seems like eras ago.
uh-huh.
I think that we kind of discussed the idea about 2 years before the historic handshake on the White House lawn. We thought that Israeli poetry on that main theme of the horrors of war and the craving for peace would express in the best way the true essence of Israel, not politics, but the soul of the people. And then I started going through an immense number of poetry books that have been published during the years of the state, and selected, I think, about 400 poems.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Those 400 poems I brought over to America, and then we...
Well, there's 61 poets represented, and the question was how well would they translate, and how many could make the passage into English. And we made a rough cut then, and then it was a process of fixing up poets with American translators. Most of the translations are done by American poets themselves.
It's like a matchmaking agency.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's fun.
Well, the range of American poets that you were able to find or create for the anthology is really quite wonderful. It also represents, besides a wide range of contemporary Israeli poets, a very wide range of contemporary American voices. And what's interesting is some of the poets you can really hear their voices come through the translations. I think we were talking about this the other night. William Matthews is one. There's a characteristic.
Oh, he was a marvelous translator.
Yeah.
Without understanding the language, of course. That's an intuition.
The assassination of Rabin must have then created an urgency that you could, the tragedy, the awfulness of it, you would never have anticipated, but it must have then created an urgency for you in terms of seeing the project through, or such as the poem that you just read, another kind of grief, another kind of deepening coming
Yes.
into
This
it.
poem is taken out of a book that the author wrote after the death. I mean, it's all carries the impact, the shock
Right.
of that. I guess that we cannot compete with you, the Americans, about that political assassinations. But for us, it was like suddenly awakening from a dream. We thought that in our country, among our people, that wouldn't be possible, and we were wrong, so terribly wrong.
Well, the other reason for the urgency was that I think people realized that the peace process was in jeopardy.
Right.
Rabin was a convert to peace in a way, and it was tenuous, and it so much depended on the force of his conviction and skill, and the government which was working with him. So, I guess it was our effort to try and keep peace on track for whatever poems can do.
Let's read another poem.
I thought I'd read another brother poem, and this one is by Amir Gilboa. Now, Azriel Kaufman, the last poet, is still alive, but Gilboa died some years back. And this one is called My Brother Was Silent. My brother came back from the field in gray clothing, and I was afraid my dream would be false, and began at once to count his wounds, and my brother was silent. Then I burrowed into the pockets of his tunic and found a dressing with a dried stain, and on a crumpled postcard his girl's name, beneath a picture of some poppies, and my brother was silent. And I undid his bundle and took out his things, memory after memory. Hooray, my brother, my heroic brother, look, I found your medals. Hooray, my brother, my heroic brother, I'll shout your praises. And my brother was silent, and my brother was silent, and his blood cried out of the ground. That's translated by A.C. Jacobs. Do you want to talk about his blood cried out of the ground?
Yes, because our poetry is saturated with biblical metaphors, and it's only natural. The Hebrew Bible, what you call the Old Testament, is the base of our language, base of our culture. If you pull the Bible from out our feet, from our cultural feet, we just totter and collapse. And it seems only natural for the poet, I mean, without second thinking, that he would put biblical metaphors and picture and word picture there. Now, the blood crying out of the soil is from Genesis, from the story of Cain and Abel, the first murder, not political, but a brother killing a brother because of rage, because of jealousy, because God did not like his offering. But that blood has been crying and crying and crying. It would never be silenced, because it's like the sign, the mark of Cain on the brow of the human race.
That's one thing I notice in the poems, is that often the horrific images of war are juxtaposed with silence. A number of the poems end with the word silence, and that's what you're left
Right.
with after the whether it's the panic of an air raid, or whether it's the sight of a wounded serviceman. That often it's what the exit line in the poem has something to do with silence.
You know, I almost thought you were going to say repetition, because I was hearing, as I was reading these two poems, that both have a kind of refrain, and which is, it's not that it's never done in American poetry, but it seems to be more done there, and I think it's because poetry there, or poets, are coming out of the prophetic tradition from the prophets, the Bible. Prophets were poets.
Yes, we regard them as our greatest poets, and they were poets.
Yeah.
If you read the Bible, you see how great poets they were, with that inner ear, listening to the rhythm of the language, to the picture words, to the subject matter, and we still derive inspiration from them.
Yeah, it's interesting how, to me, that there was nothing sentimental in the poems at all about war. In other words, there was no sort of fideistic fervor in them. It wasn't about patriotism. There wasn't any kind of secular, real institutional allegiance that was being talked about. It was much deeper. It goes back to those images as far back as the Bible. Those were the images that were being evoked.
Well, the Bible, the Hebrew Bible, is not pretty, and it's certainly not sentimental, and the image of God, or the persona of God, is an awesome, terrifying, absolute God of the desert. I mean, the landscape there, it's one of harsh contrasts, and anyone who reads Genesis can't accuse it of being sentimental in any way.
Yeah.
It's not only Genesis. I think that the Bible is a masterpiece of literature that's stamped with truth. Because take, for example, the story of David. He is our greatest king. He was, according to our legend, he was a poet and musician. He wrote the Psalms. We are not going to argue if it's true or not. Right. But you won't find in the chronicles of other nations such terrible stories describing what our greatest, the man from whose loins our Messiah would come, did. His affair with Bathsheba, sending her husband to be killed in the war, all the other gimmicks and gadgets that he liked to being such a smart politician. But only, I think, in our sources, a prophet poet, if you want, can approach the king, His Majesty, the second king of Israel, and say, you are a criminal. Remembering the story he tells him, the proverb about the rich man and the poor man with the ewe lamb, And David is full of wrath and say, yes, we should. And he said, thou art the man. Where can you find that?
Let's read another one. I think the next one was the looking toward Jerusalem.
Yes, I wanted to read this because this is written by an Israeli Druze who comes from a different tradition, an Israeli Arab, and it's called Looking Toward Jerusalem. Naim Araidi is the poet, and it's translated by Rod Jelema, who also lives in Maryland. Maybe we should gather all the boulders in the hills of Jerusalem. Maybe we should build another wall, another mosque, another church. Maybe we should bury all past wrongs. Maybe we should build at last another city, but not in the hills of Jerusalem. We shall call it Jerusalem. As you know, Jerusalem is the heart of the matter, and there's so many different religions that converge and consider it a holy place.
It's a really powerful poem. It's a deceptive poem because when you first read it, you get to that final line and you think, well, so what in a way? But when you go back, you realize what he's done is he's taken Jerusalem apart and put it back together again, and then he says, we will call it Jerusalem.
You're right.
It's a wonderful poem.
He's an excellent poet. I mean, he writes both in Arabic, his mother tongue, and in Hebrew. He has got a PhD in Hebrew literature, and he's a lecturer at, I think it was, or is, at Haifa University. And I mean, he has the pleasure of two immense literary traditions, the Hebrew and the Arabic. And I think that he does a swell job in both languages.
So he will write in both languages?
Yes, he has books in Arabic, he has books in Hebrew, and beside that he's a Druze. I mean, he belongs to a mysterious sect, Arabic ethnically, but nobody beside the wise people knows exactly the components of the Druze faith. And they originate from Egypt, I think either in the 9th or 10th century. There was a caliph of Egypt who was not exactly mentally balanced, and he thought he was a Shiite, the extreme wing of Islam, and he thought that he was the incarnation of the Mahdi, the future Messiah, and he began persecuting not only the minorities, the religious minorities, but his people too. So he was, I'm rushing through that, so he was assassinated, and then the new ruler began persecuting the former persecutors. So the followers of that particular late but not lamented left Egypt and started migrating northward. Some of them settled in Palestine, some of them in the Lebanon, some of them in Syria. And Naim is a scion of those Shiite followers of the assassinated caliph that settled in present-day Israel. I could tell you more stories, but we don't have time.
Well, what I think we should do is read another poem, but also have Moshe read the Hebrew as well, before too much time gets away.
I thought we'd read one by Eitan Eitan. The other thing I like about Israeli poets is they're not all in one occupation. They do such a variety of things, and still, whatever they do seems to support their poetry in terms of putting a life together. So Eitan Eitan was
a farmer. He used to grow papaya. He was an excellent farmer, and
a good papayist, huh?
A group. He used to bring me boxes of papaya. He thought that it would be good for my health, but he, the poor slub, died of lung cancer because he was a chain smoker. But besides being a farmer, he was a member of our best commander unit, the naval commando. He saw war face to face many times in action, and his poetry, which is magnificent. It's not only in language, because it's a mixture of the biblical and the modern in a way that only he could work out. But it has such a feeling, an intimate feeling for the man in battle dress, running under fire, up a hill or down or down or down a hill, and therefore his intimacy with the craving for peace is so convincing, because it's not, just politics, it's not high-falutin words, it's personal experience. And that poem of his, I think, is. I wish you know Hebrew, Michael, but I'm not going to teach you now. It's a pity you don't know how wonderful it is.
I'll listen.
Just one more story about it. We recently had dinner with some Israeli friends, and somehow the name of Eitan Eitan came up, and by coincidence, the man had served in the same unit with Eitan Eitan, and he had absolutely no idea that he wrote poetry. He said he was a fierce soldier. And again, that's the land of Israel. Eitan Eitan, the wind grinds. This is translated by Mara Leffler. The wind grinds bones to dust in the courtyard of death, grinds clouds, vehicles in a low, continuous burning, grinds soldiers, grinds cannons and guns, grinds buildings, grinds animals, grinds you and me. Listen, leave your explosives, your vehicles, your soldiers, leave your animals, your wars, your people. They all left you long ago. You have the wind with you. You have the burning light, the land, and the dew with you. You have the whole pulverized earth with you. Set your face towards begetting. Set your face once more towards rising.
Before I start reading in Hebrew, please pay attention to the word ruach. Ruach in Hebrew means wind or breeze, but also spirit, soul, psyche. רוח שוחקת. רוח שוחקת עצמות בחצר מוות. שוחקת עננים רחבים ברמה לוהטת נמוכה. שוחקת לוחמים, שוחקת כלי לחימה, שוחקת מבנים, שוחקת חיות, שוחקת אנשים. אתה עזוב את נפציך, רחביך, לוחמיך. אתה עזוב את חיותיך, מלחמותיך, אנשיך. אלה כולם מזמן עזבוך. איתך הרוח, איתך האור המלובן, הארץ והטל, איתך מלוא האדמה השחוקה. תן פניך בהולדה, תן פניך בתחייה.
I did want to mention that the book After the First Rain is published by Dryad Press, which is a Maryland small literary press, but it's just been picked up and reissued by Syracuse University Press and is available widely now.
We should also mention, I guess, that there's a foreword by Shimon Peres, the former Prime Minister.
Israel.
Yeah. Shall we hear from a lady?
That would be great. That would be great. Yeah, you have Esther Robb.
I have.
Is that, is that the poem you want to do, or
no? Actually, I think
Varda?
I'm going to do Shalev, Elinoam Shalev, because there's a woman's take on war. Not that women don't serve in the army; they do, but this one is just a different kind of take on it. Elinoam Shalev. Each war took me. I translated this. Each war took me to another town. One war gave me birth. Another taught me to cry. In the third, my husband took part. I walked down the streets. I buried my silk dressing gown. My eyelids stammered, small children learning to talk. I left my house and went out into the town, and the town did more to me than I did to it. I came back to my house, minus many limbs.
I really wish you would read Esther Robb too, not only because she is the first native poet that we know. Who knows who wrote, if there were women writing Hebrew poetry in antiquity, but she is the first woman poet in modern times. She was born in a small village in then Palestine, and she died at a ripe old age, I think in the 80s. And I think that in her poem, she evokes the joy of life. Because, I mean, our poetry is not only layers, built on layers of destitution, of death, of fire and all that, but, I mean, the flip side of the coin is the urge to go on living, to bring happiness to people.
Read it, because I know there's another poem you want to try and get into.
Yes,
Okay.
one
Good.
more. Esther Ropp requests, and this is translated by Catherine Harnett Shaw. Requests, I want beautiful trees and not wars, and a coat of many colors and not uniforms for all my dear ones. I want rain and green furrows and houses full of babies, a calendar of alliances and a brotherhood plaza and lightning and thunder in the sky, and bountiful rains on earth, and a pink crocus in the ravines, and pine cones on a scented bed of pine needles, and bulbul birds rejoicing among leafy orchards, and sails of peace on the Mediterranean, and white chrysanthemums in the parks, their fall maneuvers, and red balls rolling along the paths, and the sleeves of babies' garments signaling tranquility on clotheslines.
There's an Amakai, Yehuda Amakai poem that it's one of my favorites, and I think there's just enough time for us to read
We can hear
it.
from Moshe doing it in Hebrew. That would be nice.
Okay.
This was a poem Amakai presented at the Nobel Peace in Stockholm when, let's see, Rabin, Peres, and Arafat got the Peace Prize. So this was the poem he read. And he coined a word, wild peace, as one word. So there's no hyphen or anything. Wild peace. Not the peace of a ceasefire, let alone the vision of the wolf and the lamb, but rather as in the heart after the excitement is over, when you can talk only about a great weariness. I know that I know how to kill, and that's why I'm an adult. And my son plays with a toy doll that knows how to open and close its eyes and say, Mama. A peace without the big noise of beating swords into plowshares, without words, without the thud of the heavy rubber stamp. Let it be light, floating like lazy white foam, a little rest for the wounds. Who speaks of healing? And the howl of the orphans is passed from one generation to the next, as in a relay race, the baton never falls. Let it be like wildflowers, suddenly, because the field must have it, a wild peace. That's translated by Hannah Bloch and Ariel Bloch.
And now you'll
Moshe.
have Amichai in Hebrew. שלום בר, לא זה של שביתת נשק, אפילו לא של חזון זאב עם גידי, אלא כמו בלב אחר ההתרגשות, לדבר רק על עייפות גדולה. אני יודע שאני יודע להמית, לכן אני מבוגר, ובני משחק ברובה צעצועים שיודע לפתוח ולעצום עיניים ולהגיד, אמא. שלום בלי רעש, שקיטות חרבות לעתים, בלי מילים, בלי כל חותמות כבדות. שיהיה קל מעל כקצף לבן ועצל, מנוחה לפצעים, אפילו לא ארוחה. וזעקת יתומים נמסרת מדור לדור כמו במרוץ שליחים, מקל לא נופל. שיהיה כמו פרחי בר, פתאום בכוח השדה, שלום בר.
It's terrific. Well, it's been a pleasure listening to you both read and getting inside the anthology a little bit more. Thank you for joining us in another edition of The Writing Life.
The Writing Life is a production of the Howard County Poetry and Literature Society, all rights reserved.